Today we're going to talk about Himalayan sea salt, Celtic, or you might pronounce it Celtic sea salt, and other types of sea salt. Is there a big difference? Let's just jump right in. When we get into the Himalayan sea salt, we're dealing with a salt that has been extracted from a part of the planet where there is zero microplastics. This salt was extracted very close to the Himalayan mountains, but not actually in the mountains. There's other mines in Pakistan that provide this Himalayan sea salt, which is a very pure, wonderful sea salt with a lot of trace minerals and a little more of certain trace minerals that give it the pinkish color. Now, Celtic sea salt or Celtic sea salt is different. It's mined from the ocean, but in a very traditional way in a certain part of France. They sun-dry it, and they keep this standard harvesting of this salt very, very traditional. And so Celtic salt is wonderful for flavoring different foods. And it too has a lot of different trace minerals as well as sodium chloride. And there's virtually no microplastics in Celtic or Celtic salt either. And then you have a Redmond Real sea salt, another type of sea salt that's very pure without the microplastics, which they extract from Utah, deep below a certain level of limestone and this layer of diatomaceous earth. So it's really protected from any type of pollution. And so all these salts really have come from ancient seas, except for the Celtic or Celtic sea salt, which comes from an ocean. But the way that they harvest the salt makes it extremely free of pollution. Now, when you consume regular salt, or especially sodium chloride, which is just 2 minerals, right? Sea salt has like between 60 and 94 minerals. You're going to get things that you don't even know. You don't know where it comes from necessarily. It can come from an ocean that's very polluted. And one study showed that 90% of all salt contains microplastics, okay? These plastics take a bit of time to break down. Roughly 500 years. So unfortunately, they are polluting our environment and they can act like an endocrine disruptor to our bodies. Just like pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, heavy metals, microplastics can also affect our endocrine system. So I highly recommend you do Himalayan sea salt or Celtic sea salt or Redmond Real sea salt or even Baja Gold sea salt, which is kind of a mixture of fresh water and ocean water. It's much lower in sodium chloride and much higher in these other minerals. Where these other sea salts I just mentioned pretty much have like 90 to 95% or more sodium chloride. The Baja Gold has like 70% sodium chloride. And I'm not saying which one is better or worse. They're just different mixtures of these minerals and trace minerals. If you want to get more trace minerals, go with the Baja Gold. If you want to get more sodium chloride with the trace minerals, get some of these other ones. But just because something has more sodium chloride doesn't make it less healthy at all. You know, we depend on sodium and chloride. And when we become deficient in sodium as well as chloride, boy, we have all sorts of issues. One of the biggest signs that you're deficient in sodium is overall muscle weakness. Let's say you want to exercise and you just you lost that get up and go. And what if you do exercise and you don't have enough sodium? You're going to lose that endurance. You're going to feel tired. And also realize that you can lose 1/2 of a teaspoon of salt with 1 hour of exercise. Also, you can lose a good amount of salt when you drink coffee. Like if you were to drink 4 cups of coffee, you can lose up to 4 teaspoons of salt. I mean, that's crazy. And so we need sodium desperately. And I think people that are against salt really are not looking at the big picture, because even if someone has salt sensitivity, what that really is either a potassium deficiency because sodium and potassium work together, or it's insulin resistance. When you get someone on keto and you get them off the carbs, they don't seem to be salt sensitive anymore. And we need this ratio of a little bit more than double the potassium to sodium. So as long as you're doing enough potassium, you can tolerate a good amount of sodium. Another very interesting fact about sodium is this. When you are deficient in sodium, it taxes your adrenals. In other words, your sympathetic nervous system goes higher. That's the fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system goes down. And this would explain why, if someone is deficient in sodium, they will have more adrenal stress. they might feel more anxiety. They will definitely not sleep as well. In fact, if you have a sleeping problem, especially due to stress, just try this one thing. Consume a little bit of sea salt before you go to bed. Now, you can put a little salt underneath your tongue or in your mouth, or dissolve some in some water, just a little bit, okay? Drink it down and go to sleep and see how much better your quality of sleep is. So without enough salt, our adrenal glands work harder. Sodium chloride, as well as the other electrolytes in that sea salt, will really help hydrate you versus just drinking water, which is not too hydrating. In order to take that water and push into the cells, you need electrolytes, especially sodium and potassium. Also, if you're low on salt, your risk for insulin resistance goes up. And so this is a really important point. If you're on the ketogenic diet, okay, low carb, if you're doing intermittent fasting, if you're doing prolonged fasting, boy, you better take enough sea salt or you're not going to feel right. You might end up with low blood pressure. You might end up with dehydration and overall weakness. And so it's not just about taking an electrolyte powder with potassium. Also make sure you take enough salt. I would recommend at least 1 level teaspoon per day for an average person, and that's without exercise. The sodium chloride in the sea salt also helps with your immune system, but the other minerals also help too. I mean, you have selenium, you have calcium, you have iodine. All of these minerals are very, very important. I mean, it's pretty wild that people still use table salt, right? You have the anti-caking mixture in there. Sometimes they put a kind of a poor source of iodine in there. Sometimes they add sugar to the salt. But the problem with table salt, it's just a refined product. You need these other trace minerals. These other trace minerals are essential to help you with proteins and enzymes, which are catalysts that allow chemical reactions to occur. And unfortunately, our food is very void of these trace minerals because a lot of times the farmers don't put back in the trace minerals. They might put in 3 minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But what about all these trace minerals? Also, what about all the salad that you have at the grocery store, right? And a lot of the other vegetables. A lot of them are grown either hydroponically or aeroponically, or in soils that only have NPK. Hydroponic and aeroponic really only use like 15 minerals. And to my knowledge, they don't use all the trace minerals, which you need. So you can get these trace minerals from sea salt, a high quality one. And especially if you are exercising, make sure you have more. There are certain sports like soccer, football, and if they're practicing in the summer and they're sweating a lot, boy, you could actually lose up to 1,800 milligrams per hour and sometimes up to 6,000 milligrams of sodium in a given day. Now, sea salt also helps with the immune system. People that have, especially like sinus allergies, can be improved if they have enough salt. And there's all sorts of sea salt type of like nasal flushes that help reduce the bacteria and even the viral loads in your sinuses. If you go on a low salt diet, okay, you're going to trigger the sympathetic nervous system. That alone can increase your blood pressure. So you could end up with high blood pressure by reducing your salt because it weakens the adrenal and you have this compensatory reaction. Now, there are other types of sea salt that I probably didn't mention that are totally fine, but you definitely need to know if that salt has microplastics, and if it does, I would stay away from it. Now, because of the censoring and the suppressing of the algorithms on YouTube, it's becoming more difficult to find my content. And there's a lot of content that I cannot put on YouTube, unfortunately. So to make sure you have full access of all my information, go to drberg.com and subscribe to my newsletter by clicking the link down below in the description. I will see you on the other side.